On our last episode, we got the little Jeep running and drove it up on the lift. So this episode, we're going to go ahead and do all the brake work, replace all the hard lines, the rubber lines, as well as rebuild the wheel cylinders. But before we get started, I thought I'd give you a little tour underneath the Jeep. As you can see, the back half here, I have the framework pretty well cleaned, everything prepped, but there you can see the brake line. I just pushed them up out of the way so I could do all the refinish work. So that's what I'm going to be working on here at this point. I'm going to probably start from the rear and work forward. But we'll go down the line. Here you can see a little bit more of the floor work that I wound up doing. There's a floor pans on both the passenger and the driver side. Center section wasn't too bad. You can see the supports. I grafted those together. I was pretty satisfied with the fitment of the reproduction, with the exception of where they came up into the front half of the frame here. I wound up having to cut those apart and set them at the proper angles and then re-weld them back in. But otherwise, they fit pretty decent. But like with any reproduction, they're just never quite right. So here you can see there's the master cylinder. That is a new master cylinder I put in last year, and with that I only have the brake working on the driver front, so moving this was a little precarious. It doesn't stop very well, but we're going to rerun new hard lines down the frame. I'm going to get all these old wiring, all that stuff's going to come out of there. I have a whole new wire harness, universal wire harness kit that I'm going to end up fitting into this. Has newer exhaust on, as you can see. Steering box, I'm probably going to be doing a little bit of work here. Everything is pretty sloppy looking. Same way with the bell crank up here in the front. It's pretty worn out, so I'm going to end up ordering one of those then. But as you can see, the frame up here, I'm going to have to do some work on all that, clean everything, paint it. There's the hard line going there, and the rubber line. I have all these pieces. I don't have the brass junction blocks, but usually those are pretty decent. Just need to be cleaned up, should be reusable then. I know this is going to seem pretty obvious, but whenever you're ordering replacement parts, you should always go through and take each of the things out and compare them to what you currently have on your vehicle to make sure you have the right things and everything's going to fit up. Nothing worse than getting parts and then finally go around and you tear things apart and then you go to put it on and find out that it's not correct. So this here is what I have for a brake line kit, and just so you know, this is my main line. I don't know how well you can see it there where I have the camera at, but a lot of times these they're going to bend these so that they'll fit in the shipping container. So you're going to find that some of these, they're going to have very mild bends and you're going to end up having to straighten them out. So this here is the full length that runs from the master cylinder all the way to the rear. Now it should have this bend in here because it has to come up across the cross member over there. So probably doesn't have to have this bend here, but I'm not going to bend it yet until I know. But again, we're going to work on replacing everything across the rear here. I still got to get my rubber hoses out, and I'm going to pinch off the main line just for now so I don't have any fluid running out here. So one thing I want to also make mention of, that when you're dealing with these lines, you got to use a flare nut wrench. Don't come in here with an open-ended wrench or, God forbid, a pair of vice grips and start wrenching on these things, because you're going to end up regretting it. You're going to tear it up. So make sure you use the right wrench. One of the other things I'm going to do here now to get this off, I had undone the brass block here because I was doing the detail work on this rear. So I'm going to reattach this, and that is just so I can properly torque on these lines to get them broke free. And I don't really have to make it tight, I just want to hold it there in place. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get a rag here. At this point I can bend this line around because I'm going to replace it. But I'd really rather not damage my paint since I went through all that work to do that. All right. Trying to make sure I get squarely on that. I don't want to be on an edge or anything. Of course, this muffler is going to be right in my way too. There we go. Got that one broke loose. I'm going to go to the other side. There, it's just starting to drip. That one there didn't take much at all. So I'm going to tighten that one back just a little bit to keep it from dripping too much. Going to break the other side loose over here. One of the other things I typically like doing before I get into too much of this work, now I'm not looking to get this back on the road right away, but normally if I were doing anything as far as getting ready to rebuild wheel cylinders or whatnot, I usually check the bleed valve just to make sure I can remove that, because some of those are stuck and then they snap off and then you're pretty much dead in the water. I suppose you could probably drill and tap them out, but usually at that point, because of the cost, I usually will just buy a replacement wheel cylinder. So I usually like to test that before I go and do the work. But in this case, if they break, so be it. I'll just order up the wheel cylinders. Right now I just have rebuilds. All right, that line's freed up. Trying to wiggle this a little bit too because the line is stuck with the nut and I'm trying to keep it from twisting. So sometimes if you wiggle them around as you try to loosen them, sometimes you'll break them free. Though I suspect that this one here is just going to twist off. Which again, since we're replacing lines, I'm not really worried about. If I have to, I'll just snap the thing off. So I was trying to separate the rubber line from the brass block, and it's just not going to break loose. So just seeing if anything's going to come out of here. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up just cutting the rubber hose, and then I'll put that brass block probably in my vise so it'll be a nice flat surface to hold that. And I may end up having to apply a little bit of heat to the fitting to see if I can break that loose and save this brass block. The old line had this clip, which then attached it onto the rear housing. So we're going to go ahead and separate this clip and add it to the new line. So this new line is ready to go into place. I'm not going to bolt any of this stuff down just as of yet, because I want to wait till I make all my connections, such as this one here is going to probably need just a little bit of a relief bend to get everything to line up properly. I'm going to go ahead and stick my bolt there just to hold everything there. Alright, looks about right. Do the other side. Of course, the other side didn't have any clips on it. It probably should have had a clip, but I'm not sure. There's no clips that I could find either on the rear, so I don't know if there's supposed to be a clamp or something that goes there. I'm not sure. Should be the right way. But it too had one of these protectors on it, so I'm not sure exactly where that was supposed to originally go on. What you're looking at here is the rubber line that went to the brass block over the rear, and this is where the hard line comes up and meets, and that's the junction there, so I have to pull that clip. Rather than trying to undo that nut there, I'm actually just going to cut it flush where the line comes up to the nut and then pop the clip and then pull the whole hose out. You wouldn't normally do this, but since we're replacing all the lines, there's no need for me trying to wrench that apart because I'm not reusing any of those pieces there. So with the line cut and the clip removed, I can back this hose right out. So there we go. Now I'll see if I can get this separated from that brass block. Got this in the vise, so we're going to see if we can get this off. Oh, that makes it so much easier. Now we'll be able to reuse this brass block. Now, we'll take note, there is a copper washer in here. So we're going to need to make sure we get another copper washer on that. We'll flush that block a little bit then too. But this line was in pretty bad shape. And that's typically what you're going to see with older lines when they start to dry. When you start to flex them, you'll see the cracks in them. And that's why you want to replace these. And these are not that expensive. These are probably like $10, $15 at the most to replace. Made our connection here, so it's just a reverse process to put everything back together. Now at this point I'm not going to connect this up through that cross member because I want to do some cleaning and painting up inside of that cross member, so I'm just going to let this rubber hose hang then. We're going to go ahead and make these connections here, and then we'll try to put this block back down where it should be. I'm not going to make these lines tight. I want them to flex just a little bit with me. Now I'm at a point where I can start to tighten everything up here. I'm pretty happy with that fitment. .3/8 and 7/16 does not fit this replacement line set. So apparently these are 10mm because I'm using my 10mm, and that'll work. So I suppose now I have to buy another new tool, so I'm going to need a 10mm flare nut wrench. So in the meantime, I'm just going to snug these up. I don't want to round any of these off until I end up getting the proper wrench. So there's the rear installed, tightened up. So I guess the next thing to do is rip a bunch of wires out of my way, and I'm going to run that rear main line from the master back. Actually, I might wait on that. I think I'm just going to rip it out, get the wires out of the way, and I'm going to start cleaning this frame and getting some paint on it. I'm removing all the hard line, the brake hard line, and while I'm doing that, I want to paint and finish the rest of this frame, as well as painting the axles, and then put all those new lines on. So as you can see, I really got a lot of grime to clean up, and everything under this Jeep on the front half has been like this. So what I'm going to attempt to do is what I did on my 64 Impala many years ago when I was getting the undercoating off of it. I'm going to use this needle scaler, so we'll see what kind of results we get out of that. You just gotta let the tool do the work. I found that if I don't push too hard and just let it work, it'll break it up and do what it's supposed to do. So that's much better than it was. I still got some fine work to do on this, but I got rid of the bulk of that old dried up grease and dirt. Of course, that was probably the only thing that was holding the fluid in the differential here. But I got a lot more to go. Things were going along pretty good on the Jeep here. Got the brake lines done on the rear and started cleaning the frame so that I could run the rest of the lines and then tackle the front end and put all the new lines in on that. But project's kind of at a standstill right now until I kind of gather up everything I need to make this repair. Let me show you what that repair is going to end up having to be. After I pulled the shock out of the way, I found this. So we got a pretty nice crack here in the frame. And what had happened is the previous owner had a snow plow on here, and this was one of the mounting points, as well as there was one in the back. And the plow, I'd long since sold it, but it had a pretty good little gash in it, and I got a feeling that, and it was on this side of the Jeep, so I think someone hit something pretty hard and snapped the frame. Heck, the only thing that might be holding this frame together might be this shock tower mount. So that's what I've got. I had to run over to my parents' estate to pick up his old stick welder because I didn't have one here. All I had is my 110. So I've got the good old Craftsman. It's probably been around for a good 40 years, but should work just fine. And I'm glad when I built this shop, I wired in a 220 line that I can run that because I knew one day I was going to need to use that stick welder again. So I got a bunch of scraps out there, so I just got to find something that's the same thickness. What I'm going to end up doing is right now I have this supported at the front end, so it's probably causing this crack to be opened a little wider than it should be. So I'm going to re-support the frame and the behind the axle, and then I'm going to put a tie strap on this frame rail and pull down just to try and make sure that I have this tightened up. I'm going to drill a hole up in here where it looks like it ends, and then I'm going to V-groove this, stick weld this in, clean it off, and then I'm going to cut a plate in a diamond shape to weld over top of this. And I'm hoping that should be a pretty sturdy repair. So I believe I'm going to end the video here. I'm trying to stick with a new video each week with progress on the Jeep. This frame repair is going to be a little bit more involved, so I think that's going to end up being our next video. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button. You want to make sure you follow along, see what's going on, and hopefully it won't be too long. We'll have this Jeep out in the field and playing around. Thanks for watching.